Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It started with sunshine, laughter, and lemonade. Then a white SUV rolled up my driveway, claiming I'd joined an HOA I never signed up for. By nightfall, I was fighting forged maps, fake fines, and a clipboard tyrant named Karen. They came for my home. They picked the wrong man. It was a clear Saturday morning, one of those rare mountain mornings that felt too perfect to be real. The kind where the sun rises just behind the pines, birds dive across the ridge like they're dancing, and the smell of wet soil and pine needles makes you forget that the world beyond your 7 acres exists at all. My kids were chasing each other across the lawn, laughing so hard I thought they'd explode, while I was reattaching the trellis on the side of the shed. My wife, Maggie, had just brought out lemonade, the kind she insists on sweetening with honey instead of sugar because she read it somewhere in a wellness blog. It was the last normal minute I'd know for a long damn while. I heard gravel crunching hard under tires, too hard for a delivery truck, too heavy for a neighbor. I turned and saw a white SUV pulling up my driveway with all the smug grace of a repo man on commission. The letters Cedar Ridge Estates HOA were stamped across the door like they owned the place. 3 people got out. The one leading them was a tall woman in a tight pale blue blouse, high-waisted pants, and hair like a helmet. She looked like she walked off the cover of a southern real estate brochure and had been personally insulted by the existence of wildflowers. "Mr. Rhodes," she called out, striding forward like she had deputies flanking her, which, by the look of the 2 thick-necked men beside her, she might as well have. "That's me," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Can I help you?" "I'm Karen Whitlock, president of the Cedar Ridge Estates Homeowners Association," she said, holding up a folded set of papers like they were subpoenas. "You've ignored 5 HOA delinquency notices. You've failed to comply with payment obligations and code enforcement under Section 14, Paragraph 9 of the Cedar Ridge Community Charter. You and your family have 60 seconds to vacate this property before enforcement measures are enacted." I laughed, not out of amusement, out of sheer disbelief. "You're serious?" I asked. "Lady, I'm not part of your HOA. Never have been." Karen's lips curled slightly like she was savoring this moment. "That may have once been true. However, we've recently expanded our operational boundaries. Your property is now included within Cedar Ridge Estates, effective retroactively as of March 1st, which makes your presence here a violation." "Operational boundaries?" I repeated. "This is private land. I bought it outright 6 years ago. There's no HOA jurisdiction over it. Hell, I made damn sure of that before signing. You can't just redraw lines on a whim." "We can, and we have," she replied. "And the clock is ticking." One of her goons raised a small bullhorn and hit the siren button. The other pulled out a phone and, deadpan, started counting down aloud from 60. The kids stopped playing. Maggie stepped out of the house with a look of confused panic, holding the screen door open. "Who are these people?" she whispered. "Apparently they think they own the damn county," I muttered, and pulled out my phone. "Let's see what the sheriff thinks." Karen crossed her arms. "You're making this difficult, Mr. Rhodes. You could have handled this civilly. Now you're escalating. If you don't vacate in—" She glanced at the counter. "37 seconds, we'll file a claim with the County Enforcement Board and initiate immediate code-based seizure." "The hell you will," I snapped. "This is private property, lady. You're trespassing." "Not anymore," she said, smug as sin. "We're the authority now." The countdown hit 22. The sheriff's office picked up. I explained, fast and calm, that 3 people were on my property threatening to forcibly evict my family, claiming HOA authority over land that has never, in any documentation anywhere, belonged to their jurisdiction. The deputy told me they'd send someone over, but warned that if it's a matter of recorded jurisdiction, we can't remove them unless they pose an immediate threat. Great. So unless one of them pulls a machete, we're on our own. The countdown ended. Nothing happened. Karen didn't flinch. Instead, she smirked, handed me the folded papers, and said, "Expect a formal notice of violation from the county Monday morning. Consider this your final verbal warning. You may want to start packing." They got back in the SUV like they'd just delivered a pizza instead of a threat to my home and family. The vehicle rolled back down the driveway with theatrical slowness, as if daring me to chase them. I unfolded the papers. There was a payment demand for quarterly HOA dues, a fine for unauthorized architectural modifications, and, unbelievably, a citation for non-compliance with community landscaping standards. In the corner, it read, applicable as of March 1st. None of it bore any county stamp. But it didn't matter. The threat was real enough. Later that afternoon, after we tried to laugh it off over lunch, a letter came. Official county letterhead. My name. My parcel number. The language was clinical and cold. Notice of compliance review, pursuant to Cedar Ridge Estates regulatory overlay. It claimed my property was subject to pending administrative enforcement due to failure to adhere to subdivision statutes. Subdivision statutes on a mountain lot surrounded by national forest. I looked at Maggie. She looked at me. For the first time since buying this land, I felt something I'd never associated with this home before. Fear. Monday morning arrived not with the usual calm of mountain birds and hot coffee, but with a sour aftertaste of unfinished business. I hadn't slept well. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a warning. Every time I looked at Maggie, I could tell she was trying not to show the same worry I felt tightening around my chest like a vice. I drove down into town early and met with a real estate attorney I knew from my days designing cabins for clients. Victor Sloan, straight shooter, gruff voice, always wore the same tan windbreaker like it was a uniform. After I gave him the rundown, he barely blinked before booting up his county access portal. "What parcel number?" he asked, already typing. I gave it to him. He clicked, scrolled, then paused. Well, goddamn. That's not a phrase you want to hear from a property lawyer. "What is it?" I asked, leaning over his desk. He spun the monitor toward me. There it was. A newly uploaded parcel map, timestamped just over 2 weeks ago, clearly showing my lot outlined in red as part of Cedar Ridge Estates subdivisional overlay. Next to it, a PDF labeled Updated Boundary Certification Form signed March 1st. Signed by... Who? I asked. Victor opened it. There was my name, my full name, my signature, or rather something that looked like it, close enough to pass a lazy glance. Dated and notarized. "I never signed this," I said flatly. "I've never even seen that form." Victor nodded. "I believe you. And unless you've suddenly learned to forge your own signature while sleepwalking, someone's committing real estate fraud. Can we report this?" "We will. But first, we need to establish what changed and who changed it." He made a few calls while I stared at the map. My land, my sanctuary, was now listed in the system as governed territory under the HOA's purview. All it had taken was one falsified map and a phony form. I felt nauseous. Victor got off the phone and rubbed his chin. "Here's the kicker," he said. "County office says the document was uploaded via third-party administrative portal. They think it was submitted by a certified HOA attorney who has back-end access." "Let me guess," I said, already seeing where this was going. "Cedar Ridge's legal team." Bingo. The next call I made was to our electric company. I didn't like surprises, and something about Karen's smug smile the other day told me this wasn't over. A polite woman on the line informed me that a request had been submitted on Friday for service modification to bring property up to code. Modification. Termination of power due to non-compliance, she said matter-of-factly. "They can't do that," I snapped. "I didn't request any changes. This is my account." "Yes, but the request came from the HOA, which was filed as your regulatory authority." I just about crushed the phone. By noon, I was back home with Maggie reviewing every scrap of paperwork we had. Deed, title, survey, the original land grant from the previous owner who had bought it in the 70s. Nothing, absolutely nothing, ever tied this place to an HOA. Victor confirmed as much in writing. I printed copies and put them in a fireproof box, then made digital scans, then uploaded the scans to 3 separate cloud drives. Paranoia? Number strategy. I wasn't just going to wait around for the next knock on my door. I hired a cartographer, yes, an actual private GIS mapping consultant, and scheduled a site visit. If someone was messing with the maps, I needed to know how deep it went. Tuesday morning, another letter arrived. This one was uglier. Final compliance warning from the County Enforcement Board. It repeated the same lies: non-payment, unauthorized modifications, landscaping violations. It even listed a court filing date for a hearing I had no knowledge of. What rattled me most? The envelope had no stamp. It had been hand-delivered, which meant someone had been on our property. Again. I set up additional security cameras that afternoon, including infrared sensors and motion detection alerts. I wasn't about to get blindsided. That night, as we sat in the living room, I could feel the tension like static in the walls. The kids didn't understand what was happening, but they could read it in our body language. Maggie held my hand and whispered, "This isn't just a mistake, is it?" "No," I said. "This is coordinated." She didn't ask who. She knew. The way Karen had looked at us on Saturday. That wasn't the face of someone enforcing policy. That was the look of a person who thought she already owned us. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Wednesday afternoon started like any other. Maggie had taken the kids to a library event in town, and I had just sat down to look over a set of blueprints for a lakefront cabin I was designing. The coffee was hot, the house quiet. Then my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Front entry 1:17 p.m. That wasn't alarming on its own. The motion sensors occasionally picked up deer wandering too close or the UPS guy dropping a package. But then came a second alert, and a third. Motion detected. Utility shed. Motion detected. Back porch. Door unlocked. Manually. I froze. That last one. That wasn't right. I opened the app and pulled up the live feed. The cameras switched angles. 2 men in gray work shirts and orange safety vests were standing by my electrical panel, and one had a bolt cutter in hand. Another person, a woman in a crisp white shirt and sunglasses, was standing by the front porch steps, clipboard in hand. Even from the grainy image, I knew that stance. Karen. I bolted upright, heart racing, grabbed my keys, and was out the door within seconds. The drive home from town should have taken 20 minutes. I made it in 12. As I pulled up to the house, the scene was straight out of a goddamn nightmare. The front door was wide open. A small team of uniformed contractors milled around casually, as if they were prepping a place for new tenants. The locks on the front and back doors had been replaced entirely. New brushed steel deadbolts gleamed under the mountain sun like a mocking smile. "Hey!" I shouted, throwing the truck into park and jumping out. "What the hell is this?" Karen turned at the sound of my voice. "Mr. Rhodes," she said, like I was the trespasser, "you were issued multiple warnings. Your continued non-compliance has forced us to secure the premises for the safety of the community. You broke into my home." "We didn't break in," she said calmly. "We executed a regulatory intervention. Your property is now classified as non-compliant under the Cedar Ridge Community Charter. As president of the HOA, I have full authority." "No," I barked. "You don't. This isn't your jurisdiction. This isn't your land. You committed felony breaking and entering, unlawful lockout, and tampering with utility infrastructure. You are escalating," she said coolly. "I suggest you remove yourself from the premises before law enforcement arrives." "Good," I snapped, pulling out my phone. "I hope they do arrive, because you're all going to jail." I started filming. Every face, every license plate. The broken panel near the shed, the pliers on the ground, the brand new locks. Karen tried to block the camera with her clipboard. I stepped back and got her full face and name tag. "Smile for evidence," I said. The sheriff's deputies arrived 20 minutes later. I was standing on my own porch, holding my own deed with a copy of the original parcel map in hand. Karen was waiting by her SUV with a folder stuffed with papers that might as well have been kindling. The lead deputy, a young guy named Pollard, listened to both sides. I handed him every document I had. Karen handed over her boundary expansion chart and the same forged signature I'd already seen on the digital files. Pollard looked over everything, sighed, and stepped away to call his supervisor. While we waited, one of the workers approached me. "Hey, sir, we were told this was a sanctioned entry. We didn't mean any harm. We were told this was HOA property and to perform a utility disconnect." "Who told you?" He nodded toward Karen. When Pollard returned, his tone was clipped, like someone trying not to say too much. "Sir," he said, "we've confirmed there's a pending administrative case involving your property. I can't remove these individuals without a warrant or unless they're actively committing violence." "They changed my locks," I said. "Isn't that active enough?" "Unfortunately, there's a legal gray area until this is sorted. I strongly suggest filing an emergency injunction. That's your best shot right now." "So you're not arresting anyone?" I asked, incredulous. "No," he said. "Not yet." Karen gave me the faintest smirk. That was it. The moment the deputies left, I walked into the house, used a cordless drill to rip out the new deadbolt, and installed my original hardware back on. Then I walked out, looked Karen in the eye and said, "You step 1 foot on this land again, and I swear I'll have you buried in lawsuits so deep you'll need spelunking gear to see sunlight." She said nothing. I made 3 calls that night. First, to Victor, told him I wanted every legal option on the table by morning. Second, to a criminal attorney in Atlanta because this was no longer civil. Third, to the Georgia Real Estate and Land Use Commission and reported the incident in full. Then I sat down with my family at the dinner table and told them everything. Maggie didn't flinch. The kids were confused, but we explained it as a game. We're defending our castle. They like that. And I did too, because I wasn't about to lose my home to a woman with a clipboard and a delusion. Not now, not ever. By Friday, my property looked like a war zone that had been briefly occupied, then retaken. The doors were back to their original locks, but I kept finding little traces of the intrusion. A scuff on the floor near the fuse box. New zip ties left in the grass. A clipboard left behind in the basement stairwell. How the hell that got there, I'll never know. But I bagged it in a Ziploc and labeled it for evidence. I wasn't sleeping much. Neither was Maggie. Every time a motion alert pinged, we both jumped. But adrenaline has its uses. I spent the day turning my home into a bunker. Extra floodlights, cellular backup for the Wi-Fi router, thermal motion sensors in the woods. My land was now smarter than half the houses in town. Victor called that afternoon with news, and it wasn't the kind that made anything easier. "They've done this before," he said bluntly. I ran a full search. Cedar Ridge Estates has annexed at least 6 private properties in the past 10 months, none of which were part of their original charter. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island. How the hell does that even happen? I asked. How are people letting it happen? They're not. Most of them didn't even realize it was happening until it was too late. One elderly couple in their 80s got locked out of their house after a bogus compliance audit claimed their roof color was unapproved. They were living in their car for 3 days before it got sorted. Jesus. Victor went on. Another property, a rancher about 2 miles from you, got hit with a $5,000 lien for retroactive association dues. They ended up selling because they couldn't afford to fight it. "So we're not the first," I said. "You're just the first to hit back this hard." Good. I intended to keep swinging. That night, I got an anonymous email through the encrypted contact form I'd set up for whistleblowers. Yeah, I'd created one. Paranoia had officially evolved into foresight. The email was brief. No name, just a scanned image of an HOA board meeting memo from 2 months ago. Subject, Community Unification Proposal, Phase 2. My parcel number was listed alongside others with a note. Expedited transition pending compliance enforcement. Legal documentation in progress. I stared at the words. Expedited transition. These people weren't just faking jurisdiction, they were drafting blueprints for a hostile land acquisition. Next thing I knew, I was standing in my garage, dusting off an old wooden crate filled with neighborly favors, business cards, and handshakes from barbecues and zoning meetings over the years. I called 4 names that night. 3 of them knew exactly what I was talking about. One of them, a man named Barry Coleman, retired Air Force, built like a refrigerator, said, "I've been waiting for someone to push back." By Sunday, we were sitting around my fire pit, 5 families passing coffee and legal pads like soldiers in a foxhole. Everyone had stories, vague letters, sudden fines, power shutoffs, surveillance. Karen had been orchestrating a quiet land grab disguised as unification. She was manipulating county databases, leaning on a former colleague inside the zoning office, and using a compromised attorney who filed everything through a back channel. Submission system. "She's untouchable," one woman muttered. "No one's untouchable," I said. "She just hasn't been touched yet." We formed a working group. Victor formalized it the next day into a legal action committee. We filed a joint complaint with the Georgia State Land Committee and a class action inquiry with the Secretary of State's Office for Corporate Oversight. But I wasn't done. I contacted Channel 11 Investigates, an Atlanta TV crew known for burning through political corruption like wildfire. I handed them everything. Scanned documents, photos, Karen's audio from the lock change, the memo from the anonymous email, the footage from my security system with her on camera barking orders. 3 days later, they called me. They were in. I made one more call that day to the Georgia Bar Association. "Hello, I'd like to file a formal ethics complaint against an HOA attorney misrepresenting jurisdiction and participating in falsified land records." They asked for the name. I gave it. Turns out he already had a pending review. Apparently, I wasn't the only one filing complaints. The following morning, Maggie walked in with the mail, jaw clenched. "You might want to see this," she said, holding up a glossy HOA newsletter. Across the front page, "Community Under Threat. Proactive Leadership Protects Cedar Ridge from Outliers." Beneath the headline was a photo of me, taken from God knows where, standing on my own porch, mid-yawn, looking like I'd just rolled out of bed. The caption read, "Uncooperative resident refusing to comply with unification measures. Legal action pending." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I laughed. "Game on," I said. By the time the Channel 11 van rolled up my gravel driveway, I'd already gone through 2 pots of coffee, deleted 3 versions of what I thought I'd say on camera, and realized none of it mattered. The moment the reporter, Renee Mathers, sharp-eyed and business casual lethal, stepped out, I knew she wasn't here for fluff. She was here to hunt. We filmed for 2 hours. Footage of the lock replacement, Karen's portable siren nonsense, the fake signature, the revised map. Renee stood with her arms folded as I pointed out the exact GPS coordinates that proved my parcel predated Cedar Ridge by decades. "The county has this on file?" she asked. "Not anymore," I said. "The new map overwrote it. But I've got the original here, notarized, with chain of title documentation going back to 1973. She grinned. "They picked the wrong guy." By Monday morning, the story was live. Headline: HOA or hostile takeover. Rural Georgia Family Battles Association they never joined. I thought the real storm had already hit. I was wrong. That afternoon, Victor called. "You've got a countersuit incoming." "Let me guess," I muttered. "Karen, technically it's from Cedar Ridge HOA. Defamation and reputational damage. They're suing you for $750,000. I snorted. "For telling the truth. For deliberately misleading the public, manufacturing false claims, and inciting anti-HOA hostility." Their words. That wasn't all. The same day, we were served with a petition from the county, backed by HOA documents, requesting temporary seizure of the property under a statute I'd never even heard of, Emergency Compliance and Occupancy Review, Municipal Code 47B. "Let me be clear," Victor said. "This code is never used for residential land. It's a loophole designed for commercial zoning violations. Somebody pulled strings." "Karen," I said through gritted teeth. "She's got friends," Victor confirmed. "Old county clerk connections. The same guy who signed off on the updated parcel boundaries. Guess who appointed him?" I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was political, institutional. The worst part? The seizure request had a hearing date, 5 days from now. If it was approved, they could kick us out of our own home, pending compliance resolution. We filed an emergency injunction the next morning. Maggie and I packed go bags just in case. I hated even thinking that way, but I wasn't about to let my kids get dragged out of their beds because some deranged bureaucrat with a manicured lawn fetish decided I was a problem. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the perimeter of my property 3 times with a flashlight and my dog, Bear. The trees looked different now. Every shadow felt like a threat. My land, once a place of absolute peace, now felt like a battlefield, and I was defending it with paper and rage. The next day, Karen held a press conference. She stood on the steps of the county annex building, flanked by 2 HOA board members, both men in polos who looked like they hadn't blinked since the Bush administration. Her tone was measured, professional, laced with false concern. "The individual known as Gavin Rhodes has launched a targeted misinformation campaign," she said. "Our efforts at unification are designed to enhance safety, community values, and property standards for all. Then, without blinking, non-compliance breeds chaos. We cannot let fringe property holders endanger the collective." Fringe property holders. I nearly laughed when I heard it. Channel 11 aired it. Then they aired our response. Uncut, unedited, all rage and receipts. But Karen wasn't done. That Thursday, I received a letter from the Zoning Appeals Board. They were reopening a case from 3 years ago regarding the slope variance I received for my retaining wall. Why? Irregular procedural approval. Total bullshit, but enough to raise flags. Then came a review of architectural compliance. Apparently, my porch overhang was 1 foot too far west according to current HOA standards. And then, as if to really cap off the week, my checking account was flagged by my bank due to a court-authorized lien hold filed under the HOA's claim. "Can they do that?" I asked Victor. "Not legally," he said, "but the system assumes they can until it's challenged. which we're doing. But it could take weeks. I sat on my porch that night, watching the sun dip behind the ridge, and sipped a whiskey straight from the bottle. The wind was picking up. The trees whispered like they were rooting for me. But I didn't feel righteous. I felt cornered. Then Bear let out a low growl. A black SUV was parked just down the hill, headlights off. Watching. Friday morning, I opened my eyes to Bear still growling at the door. Whatever had parked down by the ridge last night hadn't come any closer, or at least not while I was awake. But the fact that it was there at all told me one thing. Karen was getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I spent the morning gathering everything, documents, footage, emails, even the old voicemail from Victor where he flat out said, "This is fraud," and drove to Atlanta. Channel 11 had passed my case up to their national affiliate, and now a full investigative team wanted in. Renee had set up the meeting. It wasn't going to be another fluffy local human interest piece. It was going to be a firebomb. The lead producer was a woman named Janelle Harden, the kind of journalist who made senators sweat just by opening her notebook. She asked pointed questions, didn't blink once, and by the time I left that station, I'd given her enough material for a 5-part special and a damn feature documentary. But something better happened that afternoon. Victor called me while I was halfway up I-575. "Thought you'd want to hear this," he said, barely containing his excitement. "That HOA lawyer Karen's been using, Martin Felder. He's officially under investigation by the state bar." "Wait, officially?" "Bar Ethics Committee, multiple complaints. Yours pushed it over the edge." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for days. Victor continued, "But it gets better. Remember that GIS map update? The one that placed your land inside Cedar Ridge's expanded boundary? There's a whistleblower." My stomach dropped. "Who?" "A junior clerk in the county records office, someone named Natalie Kane. She reached out anonymously through our class action portal. She says she was instructed to upload the altered map manually after hours and was told it had already been approved by the land registrar, which, by the way, it hadn't. So it was internal fraud. Yep, and she's got the email trail." I nearly had to pull over. That same day, Barry and the other landowners from our resistance group gathered on my property. Renee brought a cameraman. I gave them the tour, where the lock was changed, where the false compliance notice had been posted, where Karen had stood with her hands on her hips like she was casting judgment on a condemned man's final hour. We recorded a full group interview. Barry, fire in his voice, explained how his barn was cited for visual pollution and fined. Maria, an elderly widow, talked about the day her power was cut, and she sat in the dark for 16 hours because she hadn't replaced her mailbox to HOA standard. Everyone had something. We weren't fringe. We were a pattern. That weekend, I drove to the state capitol, not out of anger, out of principle. I delivered our packet of evidence directly to the Georgia Department of Land Oversight. I met with a mid-level director named Hammond, who looked both stunned and terrified that this many fraudulent filings had slid under the radar. He took the USB like it was radioactive. The following Monday, the fallout began. A state press release landed in every local inbox by 10 a.m. Department of Land Oversight launches emergency review of Cedar Ridge Estates HOA. Accompanying it was a statement that all HOA enforcement actions are suspended pending investigation. Karen lost her mind. I know because she tried to spin it immediately. The Cedar Ridge HOA page went full cult mode. We are being persecuted by extremist elements who wish to dismantle community cohesion, but it was too late. Channel 11 aired part 1 of the story that night. Janelle's voice narrated over footage of my land, intercut with interviews from Barry, Maria, and the others. Then they aired Karen's community unification memo and the map overlay documents. The piece ended with a chilling line. "If this can happen here, in the quiet hills of Georgia, where else might it already be happening?" Phone calls flooded in. 3 homeowners from another HOA in the next county said they were seeing similar tactics. One couple claimed their backyard was rezoned overnight and used for a walking trail. Someone from Alabama emailed with a map that looked hauntingly familiar. This wasn't a local issue anymore. This was a movement. Karen tried to hold her ground. On Tuesday, she filed a restraining order against me for harassment, defamation, and inciting public distrust of a legal entity. The judge denied it in 5 minutes. Then Channel 11 aired part 2. In it, the whistleblower, Natalie Kane. Face blurred, voice altered, but her words were clear. I was told to change legal records for private gain. Game over. By Wednesday, the atmosphere around Cedar Ridge felt different. Gone was the unshakable smugness, the air of authority Karen and her little junta wore like designer armor. The once overly friendly neighbors, the ones who waved just a little too hard when HOA board meetings were approaching, now avoided eye contact. The smiles had vanished. Something had shifted. They could smell blood in the water. Maggie and I sat on the porch that morning with the kids at school and the frost just starting to melt off the grass. She handed me a mug of coffee, glanced down the ridge, and said, "They're scared." I didn't ask who they was. I already knew. We were waiting for a call. And it came. Victor patched in with the State Oversight Commission's lead investigator, sharp, calm, and deadly polite. His name was Roland Estes, and he'd spent the past 12 years auditing crooked housing developments, zoning violations, and tax scams in 5 states. "You've made a hell of a lot of noise," he said, "and we like noise. Gets the rats running." He confirmed what I'd started to suspect. Karen wasn't acting alone. There was a full network of middlemen helping execute her unification campaign. A zoning clerk named Mark Rindle, a compliance officer from the Municipal Utility Board, even a local notary who'd accidentally authenticated over a dozen forged signatures, mine included. Good news is, Estes said, we're opening formal inquiries into all of them. Bad news is, these things don't resolve quickly. I exhaled slowly. We're not going anywhere. Estes chuckled. Didn't think you were. By that evening, I started getting messages from inside the HOA itself. The first was from a board member named Tom Ridley, an ex-cop who'd been roped into Karen's inner circle under the promise of stability and modernization. Now he wasn't just having second thoughts, he was ready to flip. We met that night, just past the county line, in a diner with the best fried catfish this side of the Appalachians. Tom looked tired, like a man who had ignored his conscience too long and was finally ready to let it scream. "She never told us the full plan," he said. "Always talked about compliance growth, but never mentioned changing maps, never mentioned breaking into homes. I didn't sign up for that." He handed me a flash drive. "Meeting recordings," he said. 4 months' worth. I nearly hugged him. One of those recordings, Victor confirmed it the next day, captured Karen admitting that the expanded maps were uploaded without county approval and that resistance could be neutralized through strategic enforcement pressure. She even joked about flipping the heat on the fringe lots until they come begging for shade. Tom wasn't the only one. Over the next 2 days, 2 more board members resigned, one publicly, the other quietly, through a notarized letter that landed in Channel 11's inbox. The HOA board was unraveling. The story was getting darker. A local realtor named Desiree emailed Renee at the station with a tip. Karen had purchased 2 lots adjacent to Cedar Ridge in her own name and conveniently excluded them from all current HOA assessments and bylaws. While forcing people like me to join, she was carving out private executive exemptions for herself. Classic. We included the details in a formal ethics complaint to the State Real Estate Commission. Victor attached the memo from the board meeting, the parcel numbers, and photos of Karen inspecting the land 2 weeks ago. And then came the subpoena. Not for me. For Karen. The state launched an official legal investigation, State of Georgia versus Cedar Ridge Estates HOA and Karen J. Whitlock, citing alleged acts of document tampering, coercion, unlawful entry, and municipal fraud. She didn't take it well. That Friday night, we caught her on one of my trail cams, alone, walking near the edge of my property line. She wasn't there to confront me. She wasn't there with papers. She was just standing there, watching, like she was trying to hold on to something slipping through her fingers, but it was already gone. Her authority had been an illusion, a shell, and now that shell was cracking. We filed a temporary restraining order the next morning, not just against her, but against the entire HOA from contacting or entering any of the properties involved in the class action case. It was approved by a judge in under 3 hours. Now, for the first time in weeks, I slept without one eye open. The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning at the county courthouse, a blocky red brick building that looked like it hadn't seen a real scandal since the Nixon era. But that day, it felt like the epicenter of something much bigger. Maggie and I arrived early. I wore the only suit I owned, the one I usually saved for weddings and funerals, though in this case, it felt like both might apply. We were met outside by Victor and Janelle from Channel 11, who had just wrapped Part 4 of the broadcast and promised a live segment by evening. Barry and the other plaintiffs from the class action suit showed up in a cluster, all holding files, photos, and copies of forged documents. We looked like an army in plaid and denim. Karen arrived 20 minutes late. She stepped out of a dark Lincoln with tinted windows, flanked by two stone-faced attorneys in $3,000 suits and a mountain of smug. But she didn't make it 2 steps before cameras started flashing. A Channel 5 crew had joined the media storm, and someone from the Atlanta Constitution was there, scribbling furiously into a notepad. She paused at the courthouse steps, clutching a leather folder like it might save her, then walked inside, eyes fixed straight ahead. No greeting, no apology, just a woman walking into the final act of her own illusion. The courtroom was packed. Locals had come out in droves, some from Cedar Ridge, others from miles away. Most just wanted to see the woman who had tried to reinvent land law with a smug smile and a signature stamp. The presiding judge was a wiry man in his 60s named Judge Hartnell. No nonsense, no theatrics. He called the docket, looked at both sides, and said simply, "Let's get to the truth." Victor presented our evidence first: the forged signature, the altered GIS data, the whistleblower emails, the board meeting audio from Tom Ridley. He played the part where Karen laughed and said, "We apply pressure until they fold. That's how HOA compliance works." The courtroom went dead silent. Then came Natalie Kane's testimony, live, in person, flanked by legal protection from the state. She detailed the falsified upload orders and named the county clerk who had authorized them: Mark Rindle. I glanced at Karen during that part. Her jaw tightened. She looked at her attorney, then back at the bench, like she was trying to decide whether to melt or explode. Their defense didn't go well. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that intent to expand governance wasn't illegal and that HOA rezonings were a gray area under Georgia municipal law. Judge Hartnell's face didn't move an inch. "Is breaking into a house a gray area, Mr. Lasky?" he asked. "No, Your Honor." "Is fabricating someone's signature on a legal boundary map a gray area?" "No, Your Honor." Then he turned to Karen. "Ms. Whitlock, did you at any point seek written consent from Mr. Rhodes or any of the other plaintiffs before including their parcels in your HOA jurisdiction?" She hesitated. "Our understanding was that implied consent could—" "No," the judge interrupted, tapping his gavel once. "Answer yes or no." "No, Your Honor." "Thank you. That will do." By the time lunch recess hit, her attorneys were whispering to each other with the panicked energy of men realizing the brakes were out and the cliff was getting closer. That afternoon, the judge issued a temporary injunction blocking all HOA enforcement, past and present, against the plaintiffs. All liens, penalties, and citations were declared null and void pending the outcome of the state investigation. But he didn't stop there. He referred the case to the district attorney's office, recommending formal charges against Karen for fraud, criminal trespass, falsifying public records, and civil conspiracy. Karen didn't flinch. She just sat perfectly still, as if hoping the world would reset if she stayed very, very quiet. It didn't. Later that week, the Georgia Department of Land Oversight issued a public order. The governing body known as Cedar Ridge Estates HOA is hereby suspended from all legal activity until such time as internal restructuring, legal reconciliation, and external review are completed. Translation: HOA was dead in the water. Emails leaked, membership dropped, contractors walked off projects, even the HOA's bank account frozen under suspicion of misappropriated funds. But what hit hardest was Karen's own board. 5 members held an emergency session without her. They voted unanimously to dissolve the current HOA leadership structure, pending reorganization under outside mediation, and Karen. She got served with a separate civil suit from the HOA members themselves, former allies now turned plaintiffs, alleging gross mismanagement, reputational damage, and abuse of fiduciary trust. It was a full-scale collapse. The woman who once tried to evict me with a stopwatch now found herself evicted from her own empire, and I hadn't even started the real fight yet. The first morning after Cedar Ridge fell was quiet. Birds, soft breeze, no emails, no fake fines, no HOA nonsense. Just Maggie, hot coffee, and pine in the air. We had made it, but I wasn't satisfied with just surviving. I wanted safeguards, something permanent. With Victor's help, I filed to reclassify our land as a private conservation easement under Georgia law. It meant total protection, no future annexation, no HOA, no development interference. We called it Freehold Ridge. Is that even possible? Maggie had asked. Completely. We've got red oaks, nesting hawks, and a spring-fed pond. That's more than enough ecological merit. We brought in a biologist. A local land trust helped file the documents. Within weeks, the land was legally shielded. It was ours, now and always. Meanwhile, justice caught up with Karen. She was indicted on 3 felony charges and 2 misdemeanors: forgery, document tampering, criminal trespass, unlawful entry, and impersonating an officer. She tried to negotiate a deal, resign quietly in exchange for dropped charges. The state refused. Her trial was set for fall. Her attorney bailed, and as the walls closed in, the HOA collapsed entirely. Under state audit, enforcement was frozen. An investigation revealed she'd used over $28,000 of HOA funds for shady consulting and land grabs, some of it routed through an LLC tied to her niece. Barry, Maria, and I drafted a joint protection pact, locking down our parcels from any future HOA absorption. We signed it over steak and bourbon at my kitchen table. It was done. Later that summer, Maggie and I stood at the ridge, Bear asleep nearby, fireflies blinking along the trees. No sirens, no clipboard warriors, just silence. This place finally feels like ours again, she whispered. It always was, I said. And now, it always would be. Freehold Ridge. The courthouse was packed again. Same red bricks, same buzzing lights, but this time, it felt final. Karen Whitlock sat at the defense table, a hollow version of herself. No more power, no more board behind her, just Karen and the mess she created. Her hands clenched, eyes twitching, the smugness long gone. The DA's team worked like surgeons, cold, clean, and merciless. They laid it all out, forged documents, altered maps, witness testimony, audio recordings of Karen laughing about flipping the heat on homeowners. The notary, old, tired, and ashamed, admitted she'd been pressured to sign things she shouldn't have. Victor sat beside me, calm. Maggie, 2 rows back, held my hand. Barry stared at Karen like he could burn through her with his eyes. Karen's lawyers tried to paint her as confused, overwhelmed, but the jury wasn't buying it. She'd ordered lockouts, lied on forms, left people in the dark, literally. 4 hours later, guilty on all counts. The judge was blunt. She had abused her position, forged records, and turned community trust into a weapon. 8 years in prison. Parole in 5. Banned from ever holding HOA or administrative power again. No applause, just silence. The good kind. Outside, sunlight hit my face like a weightlifting. Reporters circled. I kept it simple. I got my life back. To anyone else out there, document everything. Fight smart. Know the law. And the fight wasn't over. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of a Senate committee, giving testimony for the Residential Autonomy and Protection Act, a bill to prevent forced HOA annexations, require digital notarization for land changes, and protect private property rights. I told them, I'm not here because I hate rules. I'm here because someone tried to rewrite the rules to take my home. The bill passed committee. Back at Freehold Ridge, it was quiet again. The kind where no one's watching your mailbox or measuring your grass. Maggie framed the injunction. Barry made us a plaque. No Karen Zone. Established 2025. I kept it up. Because we didn't just win back our home. We made sure no one could take it again. And now, if they try, there's a map, a name, and a law. This land is ours. Forever.